I've started the webinar. The attendees can see us now. So now I'm just going live. Can I please ask everyone to be on mute? All right, we are going to be live in the coming 4 seconds. Don't worry, after that 4 seconds, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen. Then just know that we are live on Facebook. All the best. We are live, Busi.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Busi Sibeko, and I'll be chairing this meeting. We ask all those who are joining to please share what they're learning with us throughout this session on Twitter using hashtag #PayTheGrants. And we thank you for joining us yet again. About 4 months ago, we gathered here as 160 plus organizations calling for a 6-month extension of the COVID-19 social relief of distress and caregiver grants. We also asked that the grants be increased to the food poverty line. The social relief grant was extended by 3 months. In 3 days, this extension will end. 3 days ago, the president stated that, quote, the Lekgotla has agreed that in the context of continuing COVID pandemic, we need to consider the extension of basic income relief to unemployed people who do not receive any other form of state assistance. Close quote. We support this call. We are also here again calling for the extension of the SRD, but this time we ask that the urgent progress be made towards a basic income guarantee for those aged 18 to 59. We have found that 40% of those who are eligible for the SRD are actually getting it. This exclusionary nature through means testing, which is also considered gender blind, of how these grants have been implemented needs to end. And therefore we call for basic income guarantee that is not exclusionary. We also value the voices of those who are impacted, and we have called recipients of these grants to join us here today. So you'll be hearing in the first part from grant recipients themselves who are also activists in this area. Later on, you'll hear the statement that has been written. And lastly, you'll also hear from some speakers who you may have seen in our previous press conference. And now I'm going to be asking or calling on Duduzile Dlamini, Comrade Duduzile Dlamini. For those whom the Unemployment Insurance Fund, UIF, and the temporary employment relief scheme grants weren't accessible. The COVID SRD grants and the caregiver grants have been a lifeline. Those in informal work or work that isn't yet considered work are particularly hard hit. Speaking from this constituency in that position is Dudu, Comrade Dudu, and so I'll call on Comrade to speak to us now.
Hi everyone. I hope that everyone is kept safe. I'm Duduzi Dlamini from Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force. I'm an advocacy manager. We're advocating for full decriminalization of sex work in South Africa. For now, sex work in South Africa is full criminalized. The COVID, it affects a lot the key population, the marginalized group, LGBTQI plus person, by sex workers, because since government was taking out the plan and didn't put sex workers in the plan, and it was very challenging and they were affected a lot. The way that some of sex workers, they were thrown out by landlord. But today I wanna put sex workers in general, all women in South Africa, how much they were affected by the COVID. Because during the COVID-19, sex workers, they couldn't able to provide for their families. And there was too much pressure for them because it's only way that they make money and income to provide for their families. During the COVID, they couldn't able to pay their rents. And some of the sex workers, they didn't able to pay their rent, and the numbers of the sex workers were increasing, those sex workers who were homeless. And during the COVID-19, but also sex workers, they were more experiencing the gender-based violence, but also experiencing the human rights violation from the police. All these things was happening during the COVID-19, even the death of sex workers, there were too many sex workers. We lost like 6 sex workers. Now I'm going to talk more about the importance of this 500 rand. The 500 rand, it was very important for each citizen of South Africa, because it's making a huge, when you're looking at it now at South Africa, the children, they were getting 450. That means that 450, they were not able to do everything for their children. But the 500 rand, it makes a huge difference from the mothers. I was talking to other mothers. I was talking to another women who are unemployment. Those women, they couldn't able, when they lost that 500 rand, they taking away that 500, because they saying that the 500 rand, they was making a huge different, because they can add top of the money. They even saying that they couldn't even understand why government taking this 500 rand, because of the 450 is still small for them, but the 500 rand was adding. But the top of that, government should consider that during the COVID and even in the second wave, the prices are up. So for sex workers was worse and worse, because they couldn't able to provide at all. Some of the sex workers, they do not have IDs to apply for the grant. Some of sex workers are not even coming from here in South Africa. So the 500 rand was doing a different to many families. Not only families, what the 500 rand was reaching the young women, the old women, but also reaching the grannies who are breadwinners in their homes. The 500 rand was doing different to many families, and should become back permanently for them, because the things that it's happening, everything that was less before the COVID was increased from the 2 rand up to 7 rand, up to 10 rand. And then that makes families hunger, because they could not able to afford to buy some food and also the food parcel was not reaching everyone. Specific for sex workers, they couldn't get any support from anywhere. Besides, Sweat was open and try to open back a body where people they will donate. It's only ways where they get a voucher of 250. That bodies people they will donate some cash, and then we support sex workers with coupons. And government didn't reconsider those women who working as sex workers. Their families and their children, they were struggling and they were affected by double. I think this 500 rand should come back, and but also government he need to reconsider sex workers, because sex workers it's only income that they make. And then when you're talking about the community workers, I think also government should reconsider those women who working, because it's not because they're not sticking on their schedule, but they're sticking in their schedule, but they also working overtime because they are trustworthy in the community. Affairs people in the community, the family is having problems, they're working hard and they walking into these families. Then the important thing, the difference between the nurses and the community workers. The community workers, when they're working in the community, they have enough time. They're not just talking about healthy issues, but there is more and more and more things, because they have enough time they spend in each family to get the bottom line of the issue of the family. I think that also government should reconsider their salaries and support all the needs that they need. Government should be really reconsider those women who working hard, sex workers, LGBTQI, every each and community workers, they need to be reconsidered, are hard workers. The 500 rand, I advocate and I fully support that those 500 rand must come back, because it's make a huge difference in people's life in South Africa. I think it's very important that government reconsider to bring it back, those 500 rand. But this time also must be reaching also sex workers, and also government must put sex workers also up front, because also our women are human, our mothers are breadwinners. They need to be reconsidered as workers and recognized as human in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Comrade Dudu. And the comrade there, Comrade Dudu, has raised many key issues and the humanitarian crises that we'll be facing. Amongst them, you know, there's a mention of food security, care work, particularly unpaid care work, the plight of women and children in South Africa. Another important thing that our comrade has mentioned is the inflationary pressures on the prices of goods, which obviously are impacting households. And I think critically to acknowledge that this child social grant remains below the food poverty line, which the comrade already mentioned around why it was important for the caregiver grant to be extended. And I think critically as well mentioned are issues of gender-based violence and femicide and human rights violations. These issues are all intersecting, and it is critical that we think about how important this grants are in the context of all these issues, existing and emerging. I'm now going to be calling on another comrade, Gaddafi Moreroa. I'm sorry if I've said that wrong. And I'll be calling on this comrade who is a grant claimant, and they will be speaking as an unemployed person receiving this grant. Okay, I've just gotten word that this comrade is not here, and will hopefully they'll be joining us later, and you can hear from this particular perspective. We'll now move to the reading of the joint statement. I'll now be calling on Comrade Daddy Mabe to read the joint statement that the C19 People's Coalition Working Group on Grants, as well as the Institute for Economic Justice, and supported by many organizations, has co-written for this particular press release.
Good morning and thank you, Sis Busi, Comrade Busi. Let me begin by saying that seeing the suffering around me has been very painful. As someone who's been living through the reality of unemployment for now over 3 years, this pandemic has only made things worse. As the death toll of this second wave continues to devastate the country, and lockdown level 3 is extended, it is hard to understand why the government is ending the COVID-19 special grant. On the one hand, we have the government telling us to stay home, to practice social distancing and solidarity. But on the other hand, this same very government is creating conditions where we do not have special protection needed to survive this very crisis. The SRD grant has been a small but very important policy that has helped millions of families to put food on the table following a year of massive job losses and deep economic and social distress. It has been crucial at a time where poverty rates increased sharply and food prices continue to rise. After an intense campaign from civil society in October, the SRD grant was extended to 3 months until the end of January 2021. But the caregiver grant was terminated. We call this out as anti-women, since the caregiver grant by itself is estimated to account for over half of the poverty reduction impact of social relief grants. The caregiver grant is overwhelmingly received by women. We're talking about 95%, whereas women only make up the third of the SRD grant recipients. This can be corrected either through reinstatement of the caregiver grant or amendment of the SRD grant conditions to at least allow caregivers to qualify for the SRD grant. We also highlighted the poor communication from SASSA with applicants for the SRD grant, as well as the exclusionary conditions, which have seen around 1/3 of the applicants being denied grant, which have been denied access to the grant. South Africa before COVID was already the most unequal country in the world. The wealthiest 10% of the population holds 90 to 95% of the country's wealth. And that inequality has only increased now. It is deeply disturbing that the National Treasury has become even more inconsiderate about providing emergency funding for critical needs, including by a vaccine, despite numerous proposals put forward by civil society on how to unlock the resources. We don't accept the argument that the resources cannot be made available to fund the grant. Coherent evidence-based proposals have been put forward showing that this is easily affordable. There has to be a clear plan from the government on averting such humanitarian crises. Instead of terminating these grants, we have written to the President requesting a meeting where we can detail our demands for an alternative. These include, firstly, the extension and increase of the COVID-19 SRD grant to at least the poverty line of 585 per person per month. Secondly, reassessment of the unduly harsh and narrow criteria for accessing the grant. Thirdly, inclusion of the caregivers for the SRD grants, regardless of whether they are receiving the child support grants on behalf of their children. These women are being discriminated upon. Fourthly, retrospective pay for recipients in the event that the grant is not immediately extended. Lastly, urgent progress towards implementation of the long overdue basic income grant for those aged between 18 and 59. On Monday, we wrote to the president and we were redirected to the Ministry of Social Development. This morning, we received the response from the minister apologizing for not being able to meet us before this press conference. We have decided to request for a joint meeting with the president, the Minister for Social Development, and National Treasury. It is absolutely crucial that this matter is resolved rather, sorry. The government knew to expect the second wave and should have put the necessary protective measures in place for individuals, households, and business devastated by the economic crisis. And yet, we all have been left waiting. And to hear more directly from more grant claimants of their experiences, look at our full statement. We, 6 million people who are recipients, we are more than just a number. We are breadwinners. There is youth there who hope for their future. They are also human beings trying to survive a devastating global pandemic in a system built against them. Since our last joint statement and this one, our hashtag Pay the Grants campaign has been endorsed by more than 170 organizations. Over and above this, Black Sash petition, which is calling for the basic income grant, has 278,442 signatures and continues to gain support. The struggle continues, as you can see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade, for reading that statement. Again, as the Comrade has mentioned, there are about 180 organizations who've endorsed this statement, and we are calling here for those organizations who'd also like to endorse this statement to please access our C19 People's Coalition website, or to go to our socials and on Twitter, C19, again, to endorse this document. It is very important and it is critical that we all put our voices in to making sure that what we are asking for is really met. And now we'll be moving on to statements of support, and I'll be starting with SAF2 Union Leader, Comrade Zwelinzima Vavi, who read their statement of support.
Thank you very much, Busi, and good morning to all of the panelists, the leaders of society, the coalition, and all of the supporting organizations who are rallying behind the call made by this People's Coalition for the extension of the, excuse me, the extension of the payments of the grants by the government. Read it indicates intention is all it was to people to experience disaster visiting ourselves in our lifetime. The South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, joins all of these organizations in the People's Coalition to support a call that is being made that all of the grants that were provided by the government in this period of the pandemic be extended beyond end of January, and certainly at least for the next 5 months up to the end of the financial year of March, whilst other alternatives are being looked at, taking us beyond March into the future. We have come out very strongly that we think as SAFTU, and we know that hundreds and hundreds of other civil society organizations support this call, that the basic income grant be introduced, and for those people who are not covered by any kind of a social grant, in particular the unemployed who are older than the age of 18 and who are younger than the pensionable years. These people live in dire poverty. As you see from the statement read, 70% of our people are living below the poverty line defined as the upper bound poverty level of 1,268 rand. And this is people, 70% of them, who are trapped in a grinding, dehumanizing levels of poverty in a country we believe is well off in overall, because if you look at the statistics that the IMF continue to churn out year in, year out, the last one having been in 2018, show that South Africa is the 5th richest country in the world if you were to consider its mineral resources and wealth, if you were to consider all other measures that are being used to measure the wealth of the country. You can't have a situation where in one country you have two countries basically, one country of the overwhelming majority which is still black and working class, coping with a 1,200 or with less than 1,200%. And this is just totally unacceptable. So 1,268 rands, not percent, correction, 1,268 rands. We think that this country must ask itself a question. Do we want to continue risking a total implosion of society? Because already we are seeing signs of a civil war facing us and oncoming. Already in our country, 58 people a day get killed on average, daily. 58 people get killed. And we know that most of the people who are perpetrating that those levels of killings are not being nailed, are not being prosecuted, are not being convicted. They are roaming the streets. We are a country regarded to be one of those worstly affected by the gender-based violence. Again, another sign that we are a nation in distress. We are a nation at war with ourselves. What is the price, we ask, of ignoring all of those signs, including the fact that already all of our cities are surrounded by a ring of fire? People are protesting daily. We are the headquarters of protest in our country, with at times 1,200 up to 1,300 protest actions registered by the police every year. What are we waiting for? Why are we not intervening? Why are we not bringing at this stage the basic income grant? Why are we not at least extending these social grants until end of March, whilst the government re-looks at its fiscal and monetary policies in order to ensure that it intervenes to stop a situation where such numbers of our people live in total poverty? Our statement also shows that 37% of the population had a shortage of food one day or the other during the month of June last year. That was before the second level or the third level adjusted as imposed by the president. And we can't wait for a disaster to implode into all manner of other social ills in society. We are already walking in a dark cloud as society, and SAFTU is fully behind this call that is being made by the People's Coalition and all of the organizations that have signed into it.
Thank you, Comrade. Particularly, thank you for raising the deep issue of inequality, or re-raising it, that we live in two countries. Thank you for that. That is very critical. And also raising the issue of resources. We know that this is a conversation that comes up and up again, and it's a continuous debate about whether South Africa can afford this. And, you know, as I like to ask, what are the costs of not supporting lives and livelihoods when we need to? What is the alternative? And now I'm going to be calling on Advocate Thuli Madonsela, who will also read a statement of support. Not sure if the advocate is there. Okay, there we go.
Good morning, dear colleagues, and thank you firstly to you, Bosi, for the privilege to say a few words. Thank you to Shahira for the invitation, and thank you to the C19 People's Coalition for taking up this battle from the beginning and staying on course until this moment. On behalf of the Social Justice Chair at Stellenbosch University and the Social Justice Hub there, and on behalf of the Tuma Foundation, I support the call to have the grants extended and to give priority to the SRD grant, making sure that it continues with immediate effect. The reason for supporting this call is an understanding by ourselves as the Social Justice Chair and Hub and by the Tuma Foundation that, as Adam Smith once said, justice is the main pillar that upholds the whole edifice. If it is removed, the immense fabric of human society must in a moment crumble into atoms. You would ask yourself, what does the grant have to do with justice? Well, social and economic justice is a justice issue. And therefore, thank you to this coalition for advocacy for these grants, because these grants are about social and economic justice. People often say that if we give free money to the poor, we're going to encourage laziness in society. But in my whole life of working in the area of social justice, governance, leadership, and entrepreneurship, I've never heard the very same people saying that families that have accumulated wealth over the years through hard work sometimes, but in our country, through hard work, plus the injustice of preventing others from earning the same wealth and creating a racially exploitative pyramid, a gender exploitative pyramid, and also the pyramid, including other forms of disability, or other forms of exploitation. I've never heard these people saying that wealth shouldn't be transmitted from generation to generation because it's going to create laziness. And I'm not judging these people and saying that they're evil. I'm just thinking that the reason people think that these grants will create laziness is simply because it's something new. It's something people haven't thought about. And obviously when people hear about something new, the first instinct is there must be something wrong with it. And now we know that these grants work. Since the introduction of these grants, which we're grateful to this coalition for pushing for them, we're grateful for government for its commitment to consider them, a difference has been made in certain lives. They have at least kept lives above hunger. They've kept financial ecosystems in villages, in townships, a little bit above water. But the key thing, dear colleagues, is to just remind ourselves, why must this be done? The call that you are making, or we are making as this coalition, it is really a call that is about a constitutional fidelity agenda. Fidelity to the Constitution requires us to look at the preamble. The preamble in our country promises everyone that we're building a democracy that is founded on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Section 10 promises everyone human dignity. Section 9 promises everyone the right to equality, and it says equality includes equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. Section 7.2 enjoins government to take measures to make sure that everyone enjoys all of the human rights. And if you look at all of the human rights, Section 27 in particular includes rights such as healthcare, access to healthcare, access to food, access to water, and access to social security. And these grants speak to access to food, access to a certain level of social security, very limited social security. And Section 237 says to government, constitutional responsibilities must be given priority and performed with due diligence. And why is Section 237 important? It's because we know that government doesn't have money, that to pay these grants, money must be taken from certain things. And one of the areas might be to again revisit some of the privileges that are given to the executive, among other things. But everything said, the grant must be extended. I know the coalition is also asking that consideration be given to expanding this grant. But just before I end, we say we're doing this because it's a constitutional duty, but it is also about sustainable development and sustainable democracy, as our colleague Zweli Nzima-Vavi has said. For sustainable development, Malcolm Gladwell says you've got to capitalize on all of your people. And in this grant, we're promising a basic level of food security. Not a lot. It is not enough to end poverty, but it is enough to diminish hunger, which is SDG 1. And of course, if government is able to increase it to 585, at least it can be a little bit above the food poverty level. So it's both a constitutional human rights duty, a duty in terms of our social justice commitment, but it's also capitalizing on our ecosystem to make sure that South Africa is ready to rise. And I'm glad also that we're having this conversation as the African Union is celebrating 20 years of NEPAD, the new partnership for Africa's development. And at the core of that again is making sure that Africa rises, and Africa cannot rise without all its people rising. And therefore, in conclusion, what is to be done? I support, on behalf of the Social Justice Chair at Stellenbosch University and on behalf of Tuma Foundation, I support that the grant be extended, all of the grants be extended, but more importantly, that the SRD grant continues to be available from the 1st of March again. We support the call that the grant consideration be given to increasing the grant to 585 Rand. We support the entire statement that has been given today or read today. But what I would like to say though, is that in addition to the statement, we call for a sustainability strategy that looks at how do we capitalize on our people? How do we build resilient families and resilient communities to make sure that this country is able to rise from the ashes of COVID-19? Thank you, dear colleagues. Blessings.
Thank you. Thank you, advocates. And thank you particularly for raising issues around how economic power is reproduced generationally through wealth, which generates more wealth, but also for recentering this conversation around the Constitution of South Africa, which is a critical document in this context that must be considered, and also for raising issues of development in relation to grants. I'm now going to call on Alana Potter, who is going to read us a statement of support from the Socioeconomic Rights Institute. Alana Potter is the Director of Research and Advocacy. I think it's on, it's muted, sorry.
Indeed, and thank you very much. This is both a constitutional imperative and a sustainable development imperative. Over the last decade, the Socioeconomic Rights Institute has worked alongside our clients and other social justice organizations to defend informal and precarious workers from eviction, exploitation, victimization, criminalization, and from the destruction of their livelihoods through the inconsistent enforcement of unconstitutional local regulations by Metro Police and city officials who confiscate and empower traders' goods as a punishment, for example, for not having the right ID card. The economic impacts of the COVID lockdown are well known and devastating, particularly to the informal economy, which comprises at least 30% of the labor force and approximately and contributes about 6% to the GDP. The role of the informal sector is critical in generating livelihoods, providing food security and reducing poverty. Informal traders, for example, don't only make food accessible, they maximize economic and ownership opportunities and create multiplier effects into local communities that they are a part of. This is vital when 1 in 3 people go to bed hungry. According to the NIDS-CRAM survey, more than 2 million of the people who lost their jobs during the lockdown were women. 60% of families are headed by women. Women are breadwinners. Research has shown that women's income goes to food security and to education. And so this impact accrues not only to women themselves, disenfranchising them, but to whole families. Reducing income to women reduces income, health, food, and education to whole families. Trends also show that gender-based violence rates increase with male unemployment. Civil society has mobilized and a range of local and global networks like the C19 Coalition and civil society organizations have generated valuable evidence and engaged government in a variety of creative and persistent ways. We've been able to demonstrate and advocate for strengthening the informal economy, which would require improvements in the regulatory environment, better, clearer, more consistent messaging, supportive health measures at markets and trading spaces, the recognition of informal and precarious workers, and of the informal economy as legitimate and valuable contributors to socioeconomic resilience. But importantly, informal and precarious workers have been particularly hard hit by measures to prevent the spread of COVID and need direct income support. Street traders, for example, have used their last savings over lockdown and need cash grants to start trading again. What is needed is the continuation and increase of unconditional cash transfers. We say cash because vouchers often distort local markets and exclude street traders and other informal workers. We say universal because history has taught us that when you try to regulate or incentivize particular behaviors or to apply means testing or onerous qualifying or screening procedures, you'll end up spending a lot of money excluding the very people you need to reach. There are almost invariably unintended consequences. in terms of criminalizing and further marginalizing people and incurring high administrative costs. Means testing for social security grants is popular, but it comes with shaming of recipients, and the universal payment of a grant will reduce this. A basic income grant is a real commitment to poverty relief. But in the meantime, the extension of the social relief grant, increasing it to at least the food poverty line as a bridge to a basic income grant is essential. And rather than getting complicated, a cash transfer will enable people to meet the basic needs, and it will have a multiplier effect. If I buy your tomatoes, then you can pay your child to go to school. In a country with such massive inequality, this kind of circular economy has been crippled, and this must be done. It must be recatalyzed. In terms of affordability, we've also seen that regardless of the costs, the state argues unaffordability. In 2005 and 6, when we had a fiscal surplus, the state argued that a basic income grant wasn't affordable. This is a question of political will rather than affordability. And the question that you raise so often, which is so right, is can we afford not to do it? It is universal, it goes to everyone. We can get it back through tax and corporate tax. We must consider a wealth tax. But basically, when more than 55% of people in South Africa live in poverty, can we say we can't afford it? We need to extend the social relief grant. We need to increase it to at least the food poverty line, and we need to use it as a bridge to the basic income grant. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade, for that input and particularly highlighting the informal economy there. And of course, using the word that economists or the words economists love to hear, multiplier effects. I personally believe and strongly believe that there are strong economic arguments as well. We've obviously throughout this presentation made strong human rights, developmental, economic power, arguments for this grant, and thank you for highlighting the strong economic arguments as well for this grant. We'll now be moving to our last speaker, Comrade Gaddafi. I hear that we've got him on the line. And for all the people who are joining us today, please send your questions to the questions and answers. We'll be taking questions after this. This is our last speaker. So as the last speaker concludes, please begin to put questions into that box. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. As one of the recipients of the FRD grant, we are saddened about the termination of the FRD grant while the president has increased the lockdown regulations by six weeks. It saddens that the lockdown is still there, but FRD grant is been cut off. While that's 350, as much as it's small, it was assisting someone to put food on the table. And when the president is saying they terminate the grant, we are saying as the recipient, why can't the president extend the grant at least with an extra month, even after the lockdown, extra month? Because when you say you are terminating it, while you are saying to people stay at home, how will they put food on the table? You're taking away their money. Yes. And again, instead of the president terminating it, these are the options that we are putting on the table. Can the president extend the grant and increase it at least to 585 a month? And again, they should assess the accessibility of the grant. Firstly, the accessibility of the grant, we're talking about post office can't manage the recipient. When you get to post office, they tell you that they work with number. And you get there, you only have money to go to post office. You don't have money to come back. Again, the options that we are saying, they should implement on including the caregiver, in spite of the caregiver getting the child support grant, because that money is for the children, it's not for the caregiver. And when the caregiver uses the money for him or herself, they say she's not doing what the money was due to do. The system, it says to the recipient, you are approved on the system of SASSA. But when you get to post office, You get there, the system brings on both of the system brings, you're not yet there in the system. And you don't have money. It's been 3 months. Some of the people, they don't know where to go now. Because when you get to SASA says we cut the number at 50. And it's 10 o'clock in the morning. You ask yourself, if these people is going to cut the number at 50, then I can't access SASA today. When you come back next week, the very same number is still cut on 50. When are we going to be serviced? What will happen to those people that have been approved 3 months ago and they didn't get money? Let me just submit on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade. I think it is very important, again, as noted earlier, that we hear from recipients of these grants. Their voices are important in this conversation. Thank you, Comrade Gaddafi, for raising the issues around accessibility, including the costs of accessing the grant itself, and also for raising issues around the inefficiencies in terms of the rollout of the grant and how it is getting to people and the issues with the system. These are very critical issues that need to be addressed as a part of the rollout of this grant. We'll now be taking questions. We currently have 2 questions in the box. And the first one is around PPE, around we must demand a standard ration of PPE to each person in the country for the duration of the pandemic. And there's more around what arrangements are being made to support COVID orphans. That is a critical question that has been raised there. I don't know who from the coalition will be taking this question. And the question again is around what arrangements are being made to support COVID orphans. Okay. Okay, I think I'm hearing someone.
Hi, Busi. This is Natasha Valley. I'm a member of the Cash Transfers Working Group, which is part of the C19 coalition. And well, I wanted to take the question that asked about what individuals can do to help. And there are a few things that I wanted to point out. And thank you so much for that question. And thanks for everybody for attending. So the first thing is to get the organizations that are in your community or with whom you work, or to look out for organizations that are working around social justice, that are working around food security, that are working around economic justice, and alert them to the call for a basic income guarantee. I think that if we start with the organizations that we're part of, we can make this a mass call. You can also join the Pay the Grants campaign by going to #PayTheGrants on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram. Another thing you can do is that the Black Sash, who's also a partner organization for this press conference, has a petition for basic income support. It already has more than 240,000 signatures, but that's an important thing that you can sign on to, the Black Sash petition for basic income support. And then, of course, the last but important point is that we need to come together. So we need to make this a call that is not only by individuals, but is strong amongst community organizations, civil society, trade unions, and put extreme pressure on the government for this temporary, for this bridge increase. So the 1-year increase to the COVID grant to include caregivers, for the amount to be increased to at least 585 Rand, and for that to be a temporary bridge on the way to a basic income grant.
Thank you there, comrade. I think in terms of the second question, I don't know if anybody would like to provide input. I see shares.
Yeah, I could also.
Okay.
I think let Lynette and Mamtuli go, and then if I'm covered by them, I won't have anything to say. Thank you, Busi.
All right, thank you.
With regards to the COVID orphans, there is a system in place with SASSA, foster care grants, or I think you just need to go to the SASSA office, explain the situation. They will then direct. A caregiver certainly must go with that person, or if there's a foster care mom, parent, caregiver, also to go with the person. And there's various options. I mean, the quickest one is to get the child support grant. The foster care grant is a little bit of a longer process. But there is, government has just passed an act to top up the child support grant for those situations. So I think your nearest SASSA office or the call center would be a quick way to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate. Can you please follow up, and then Shara if she's got any additional comments.
Advocate, you just need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, dear colleagues. Thank you, Busi, and I'm glad that I'm speaking after the last colleague. From the SCOPRA side at Stellenbosch University, we've requested that government should invest in at least 2 social workers per ward. Even if it's not social workers, it can be auxiliary social workers. Because all of this explanation that has been given, these are legalities to become a foster parent, for example. A lot of our people are foster parenting, but they've not gone through the legal process. And we're talking about parents falling left, right, and center. Just yesterday, this morning, a colleague was telling me that 3 days ago, they lost a relative, the husband, and this morning they lost the wife. So that's happening fast. You're not gonna be able to go through the legal system. But if we have social workers, we have 4,392 wards. Double that number, you have about 10,000 auxiliary, social worker, maybe 1 social worker and 1 auxiliary social worker a ward, who will then expedite the resilience of families in respect of all aspects of the grant. And then just to answer to those who are saying, how can you help? Just speaking from the Tuma Foundation, we, like all others, we've delivered food parcels where we can, helped individuals, as individuals paid for food or for people we could help, but as an organization, we've helped. But where I think we can all help is in those communities where we are, help people to comply with the system. Because until government responds to this call for social workers in every community, we need to become the social workers, linking people with the system, making people aware where to go and where to get help. And 2, mediating with government where the system is not responding fast enough or empathetic enough. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there's any members of the media who have specific questions, please put them in the chat. But we have covered the main questions that have been raised, and I'll now be handing to Shaira to add to what has been said around these questions.
Thank you, Comrade Busi. So there's just 2 things. The first is that Comrade Roshila's question about COVID orphans is extremely important, and it is part of why we've been pushing that SASSA's and DSD's capacity is really expanded. This is an unprecedented time of suffering, and we are unfortunately experiencing the worst kind of inconsideration from our government. If you think about it, in some communities were able to mobilize thousands of food parcels, and our DSD was not able to implement its promise to provide support for people in this time. We've also seen that SASSA's mobile services have been closed in COVID. And this for me is irrational. SASSA staff at the peak of the pandemic were working at 50% their capacity. This is unacceptable. We also saw that because of this, there was a backlog of over 19,000 unprocessed applicants. And we know that even with the COVID grant, while we are pushing for the extension and for the increase of the grant, we also are pushing for an expanded consideration of how these processes must work, better communication with claimants, for example. So these are fundamental to the call for SASSA to really for DSD and SASSA to up its game in these unprecedented times. And I think all of us need to put that political pressure on our government not to abandon the most vulnerable at this time.
Thank you, Comrade, and thank you. I'm going to take the liberties as the chair. We have gone a bit over time and we don't seem to have extra questions. And just again to thank all the organizations who've signed this petition. A special thank you to all the people who've spoken today, and a special thank you to Jan Overholzer, who is our translator today. It is critical that we always make these meetings accessible, and we thank you so much, Jan, for making this more accessible. And thank you all for joining us. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email us. I think, and Cheryl will correct me here, the email address is paythegrants at, I want to say Gmail, I might be wrong.
You're right. Pay the
grants. Okay. So I am right. Please do email us. Please do engage with us on social media, #paythegrants. Thank you again for joining us. This is the end, and thank you from me as well. Paythegrants@gmail.com. Sorry, that is the correct email address.
All right, we are officially off on Facebook. So if maybe you want to engage before I close the meeting.
No, I think, who's still here?
Thank you very much, everybody, for a great conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynette. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. We'll definitely take up a conversation with the organizing team. Ernest, we really appreciate all your technical support and getting Gaddafi on the line. That was great.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ernest.
I second it. Thanks so much, Ernest.
Bye.